people in this town. They've lost their spiritual connection.
In the original video I made of Cyberpunk 2077, one of the things I praised about the game was the commitment to a bleak, depressing, violent, and selfish narrative. From the moment you start to the moment you finish, Cyberpunk is not about saving the world, it's about saving yourself. Let's talk about pessimism. Pessimism is a tendency to see the worst aspect of things or believe that the worst will happen, a lack of hope or confidence in the future. Philosophical pessimism, to put it in a simple matter, is sustaining a strictly anti-optimistic view of the world, assigning a negative value to life and existence. According to our 1800s iconic sad boy Nietzsche, stated that it is the consequence of the absolute illogic of the world order.
I said, Nietzsche, shut the fuck up. Put it down!
End quote. We can try to influence, shape, and modify our life and maybe our future based on our intentions and actions, but at the end of the day, it does not matter because we are transcended by much bigger forces that simply do not care for our desires and wishes. This last part can be interpreted more positively too, by the way. On the other hand, Schopenhauer argued that to be alive is to suffer continuously because it is impossible to satisfy one's will to the fullest. The fact that people continuously will means they have a lack or deficiency. Therefore, they suffer because their will is essentially the essence of life. And pessimism also argues for a mistaken belief in human progress. Okay, leaving all that heavy information aside, let's try to keep these themes in mind and discuss Cyberpunk's narrative and setting. And I would also like to remind you that this applies to the anime adaptation Edgerunners because it has a similar story and it's set in the same universe. Night City and the world of Cyberpunk did not change overnight. It was a slow process rather than a specific event that affected everyone. This gives people and generations enough time to properly get used to such a reality. And when one gets used to something, it becomes hard to fight against it. I'm not implying there are not people around willing to fight against how things are, against a system or a society, but I'd argue it's a reduced number. This world is one for the greedy, the desperate, and people who have nothing to lose, or also for the people who are willing to try and live a somewhat regular life too. Most people aim higher than they'll ever reach because it is impossible to rise to the top, economically, socially, and politically speaking, without stepping on someone. In this world in particularly, the options are limited. Become a corpo to gain some sort of stability and achievement in life, although working for a morally unethical company. Becoming a criminal is another option, hoping to achieve a similar result. Or trying to live a normal life, quote unquote, sadly in scraps. Everyone in Night City is struggling in some way and everyone has a different way of dealing with it. From a casual night watching braindance and eating locust pizza to getting addicted to chrome and violence. In this narrative, not all people are bad. Some characters can help out B and are genuinely nice people like Misty, Judy, or Jackie, but not without going through misery and distrust first. Companionship and camaraderie are commodities. It's something you can't put a price on, and that's why characters like these stand out, because of their willingness to do good just because, as well as for how they find ways to deal with their pessimistic reality, find happiness and union in people, and meaning through other, slightly healthier means, not just economically speaking. Morally evil and I suppose more neutral characters are the ones that are living a superior life, that experience less misery in life. That's why it's so sad that Jackie doesn't survive the heist and in the end he's just a dead body in the back of a cab. Although not entirely true though, because he has family and friends and he's not entirely no one. He was perhaps no one to the world, to Night City, but he was everything to his people. Something that deeply saddens me about the narrative of this game is V. Even if they engage in a relationship with someone, say romantically with Judy and friendship-wise with Panam, in my case at least, they're not fully committed to those relationships or they're emotionally distant despite supporting them in some way. I'm not necessarily blaming B, simply pointing it out. One of the most remarkable scenes in the game is when you have to attend a sex club to acquire some information, and V has to participate for a bit. They have to find a quote-unquote doll, a type of sex worker or someone whose function is to please the customer only to get their memory wiped soon after, which is depressing in and out of itself. At any rate, they will show the client their most desired fantasy, and it's just sad that B's is simply human intimacy. V still has this mercenary solo mentality going on because this is the type of people that the city shapes up, and this is ultimately the type of people who survive and who are capable of going up the top, at least in theory. The relationships that are most prominently featured are the ones that have a common interest, whether it is revenge, money, or power. All valid human emotions, by the way, but ultimately not as valuable as something like love or friendship. And in Night City, that's just how business is done. But surprisingly, not in an edgy or cartoonish way, but more cruel and sad. In a way that once you see the situation, you kind of just understand. You don't justify it, but you understand. I don't think the narrative of Cyberpunk is this way just because in this world it's hard to survive, to live a life out there, and I'd argue it brings out certain conducts and dangerous life paths for people. That's why people a lot of the time resort to violence, because there is no other way and because it ultimately ends up working in a world like this. This can be backed up if you played the game for some time or watched the anime. You'll notice the most aggressive and hurtful B or David's crew are, they achieve better results, even as little as in conversations. This does not rest value on a somewhat morally better version of B or to a character like David or Maine, but it certainly has value in itself and helps support this aggressive narrative. Then the narrative shifts from quote-unquote being someone, achieving success, progressing in some way, to simply getting back at the people who hurt you, at the world that hurt you. And eventually it turns bleaker, sadder, and miserable. Having the engram in your head is slowly killing you, of course. V is acting out of self-preservation, and that means carving the way any way you can. Something that's intrinsically human, by the way, but it comes with this existential dread of what's the point in anything? What's the point of trying to change Night City? No matter how hard you try, corporations have superior power over the population. What's the point of digging up the past of a dead anarchist rockstar if his motivations were selfish and terrible? Johnny Silverhand, despite having an interesting character arc at the end of the game, if you tackle some side quests, was one disgusting and horrible human being who had success out of smashing and using everyone around him. What's that got him? The bomb meant nothing and he's slowly being forgotten by the world. Johnny can change partially thanks to the influence and experiences of the player. Still, he does so late in the game and in his life that while it may change the perspective of the player, it still means that he's dead, that nothing he did made an impact as he planned, and that most everyone who ever had some sort of respect or appreciation for him now does not. In missions like Rivers or Duties, a sense of accomplishment is reached, but always with caveats, with negatives. This pessimistic narrative is continuous and cyclic. Now let's talk about hope, holding on to something. Trying to live a somewhat meaningful life either with yourself, but in this case hopefully with someone. Achieving some sort of unity with someone is super valuable in a world like this, once again. I mentioned how valuable human relationships can be and how they can help improve or overcome this terrible reality. Just look at, and once again apologies for the frequency, but these are the quests and people who stood up to me. People like Jackie, Judy, or Panem. The most meaning out of their lives, I'd argue, is a sense of union or belonging to a social or family circle. Just look at the Aldecaldos, it's the most sensible and hopeful bunch around. Despite their flaws, they can escape this terrible reality by being good and kind to each other, helping each other out, overthrowing this heavy pessimism and simply living things out no matter how hard it gets. There's the purpose and meaning of it, enjoying the ride, so to speak, and trying not to fall into this senseless void of mystery, and instead just trying to be good, because despite not having a tangible reward, it's important to be good and to simply do good for the people that matter to you. It's important to do good for yourself too, but for the moral motivation of it, not with the idea of an incentive, because that's how we end up in a situation like this. In a situation like the world of Cyberpunk, adding of course greed, the third-party antagonist, and harsh world. This is one way hope sneaks into the narrative and bursts this bubble of pessimism. And if you've seen the anime, no better example showcases how valuable connections are than David and Lucy's relationship and the union they had when the crew was together. The world of Cyberpunk and Night City can test one's morality. This is explored in other titles like Fallout or Metro, and covered also in Red Dead Redemption 2. The value of humanity, morals, and finding peace and union, despite how dark and meaningless it all seems. In the video game Night in the Woods, there's a scene where the characters argue about the importance of existing. What's the point? What's the meaning of all? Why should we care about the universe if it doesn't care about us, if they're living in such misery? In times like this, union and people are important. The universe might be indifferent and maybe we're all doomed in some way, but there are always people who care, and it's important to care for them too, and to care for ourselves. Knowing why people are good or bad, or why things are the way that they are, might not be achievable 100%, or essential, and that's fine too, I suppose. Knowing how the world or universe operates will just turn it into just another machine following its procedure. And that sounds equally terrifying, if not more. I can picture this in an advert you'd see in Night City. I like that the narrative commits from start to finish. I like that it portrays the reality and cruelness of this world, how it gives you a taste of going up a few steps, then falling back at it. But I also love that it lets you hold on to something. It lets you understand the way of existing in a pessimistic reality like this, in Night City. Sometimes our importance is not as great or as eventful as we hope to be, and that's okay. The world is not for us to change, but for us to try and do our best to live through it. And I think Cyberpunk does a good job at carrying out this message and narrative. And it works fine because the players get to experience it for themselves the longer they play and become familiar with the city and its people. Cyberpunk brilliantly carries out this extremely pessimistic and crude narrative, but also presents important moments and key elements through characters and situations that make it possible for us to overcome this seemingly unbearable situation. Despite all the darkness, there is still some sort of light present for us. So thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video. I've done 2 other videos on Cyberpunk. I really love the game and I encourage you to check them out. Or if you're new, I'm gonna link a playlist in the description of this video so you can check it out. I have a Patreon. You can support me if it is in your means, if it is something you want. And I encourage you once again to watch my other videos on Cyberpunk. And I also encourage you to play the game for yourself, to watch the anime, and form your own opinion. And lastly, just have a nice day and thank you so much for watching. Take care.